On the morning of December 6, 2016, my dad, my uncle, and I began our 2.5-month journey to Saigon. My mom would eventually arrive later in January. The last time I was back in Vietnam was February of 2015. After a grueling 12-hour flight to Japan, we had 3 hours to kill time before we took off to Saigon. And boy, did I immediately put those 3 hours to good use. When we boarded our second flight, we had about 6 more hours of flying time before we finally arrived in Saigon. In the first couple nights there, I stayed at my auntie's house, up in a tiny little room upstairs that mysteriously had an Avril Lavigne poster on the wall. Before I would get my own place, I'd kill time by taking pictures of things like food and of buildings from my aunt's balcony. And little did I know that this skinny cream-colored one would end up being my place of residence for the next 2.5 months. I'll have to admit it wasn't my first choice, but I was peer pressured by my dad and aunt because it was literally across the street from my aunt's house. For a place just to sleep and work, a little over $200 a month seemed like a steal, despite me growing to hate it by the end of my trip. Taking a nice little poop here in a cramped Vietnamese style bathroom. Nice little outdoor poop, that's the balcony and where I'm staying. On the same weekend, I signed up at a little gym about 5 minutes walking distance from my aunt's house. The cost ended up being 250,000 dong a month. It had all of the basic amenities that your average weightlifter would need, without the fancy fluff of something like, say, California Fitness and Yoga. Here in this part of Saigon where I'm staying, the people here are very on schedule as far as their waking and sleeping hours. We step outside into this little balcony of this place, and we can see how dark and lifeless it is, how empty it is in this little street where I'm staying. Everyone's asleep. There might be a few pedestrians here and there, but overall, people go to bed by a certain time, they wake up by a certain time every day. I remember taking out the woman for our first date. We went to a fancy place, and when I asked to bag the food and bring it home, I was told by my relatives that was a cheap move. Wait a second, cheap? Occasionally, she would cook dinners for us and bring it over. Or she'd simply buy food and bring it over, like Ho Viet Long or partially developed boiled duck fetus. When she was bored, she'd even fold my clothes that I'd throw around the room, and would embarrassingly discover my underwear. I bet you guys didn't know that in December, my room got broken into by the world's dumbest criminals. Why were they dumb? Well, even though they searched through my bags and luggage and made a mess in my room, they still failed to find the cash that I hid. They didn't even bother taking my computer or camera equipment that they could have sold. This was the first of quite a few problems I had with this place. One day when my grandma came for a surprise visit, I gave her a surprise visit.
Phải nhớ con không?
Ngoại á, tâm á.
Tâm con quá, chị Hẹn á.
Gì bự vậy?
Nhớ không?
In her old age, she has amnesia, so she mostly remembers me as a child. But once she realized who I was, she loves me all the same. When there was time, my cousin Tan would take me out for some coffee or smoothies either outdoors or indoors. And there was one night where we went out to fancy seafood with my dad, my uncle, my aunt, and the woman. This was during the Christmas season, so many businesses got into the festive mood and had their employees wear Santa hats. December was the month that I discovered the coffee house, a place I would go to semi-regularly to do some work. On Christmas Eve, my uncle, my cousins, and I went to Nguyen Street, a touristy pedestrian stretch of road right in the middle of District 1. All of the expensive hotels, shops, and malls are clustered around this area. Foreigners, rich people, and Daya are certainly most welcome. Christmas season here is very packed and festive, kind of like Lunar New Year or Dut. For a minor tip, you can take your photo with costume characters, kind of like Times Square in New York. We then walked over to the fancy new Takashimaya Mall. To us, it just seemed like an indoor air-conditioned version of what we just experienced outside. Tons of people walking around and just wanting to take pictures. Even though the heat and humidity were high, we wanted to walk a little further to check out some more street scenes and markets. Of course, one of the things I always look forward to when going to Vietnam is going to the salon with my cousin and doing some ear cleaning. Although I hadn't thought of video recording any of my sessions until January. Of course, how can I forget being reacquainted with one of my favorite simple cheap meals in the form of eggs over easy, hot dog, beef, liver pate, laughing cow cheese, and with a side of French bread and lettuce. Occasionally, we returned to Cafe Fognac for some coffee, where I started to make friends with some of the staff. In late December, I treated my cousins, their kids, and the woman out to dinner and a movie at Lotmart Mall and Theater. And then I remember grabbing some smoothies outdoors after the movie.
Bán siêu gum bao nhiêu?
Con hôn lại đi, con hôn lại đi, chưa hôn lại đi.
Trời ơi,
Ông thấy mặt luôn.
thương quá hả?
Rồi quay mặt qua cô nhìn cái thôi.
Có 20.000 rồi, màu gì?
Anh cho trời, em có nè.
Màu xanh, nước biển, coi chồng đưa lộn 500.000 nha.
500.000 đó.
December was also the month I met my new friend Lori. Lori was looking for directions to a sushi place, and I was the only one around who could speak English. We became friends and eventually went to that very same sushi place she was looking for. December was also the month of my cousin Nguyen's birthday. On every trip to Vietnam, I usually try to hit up the zoo. This time, I'd be taking the woman. But the day at the zoo was so hot and humid, so we went to Sushi World as an excuse to use the air conditioner.